has been broadly welcomed by opposition parties. How soon do you think could it be implemented?
The government's intention is that it's going to be on the books inside a couple of weeks. The government wants to have this effective in law on November the 1st, but that in itself is going to be a challenge because although the Cabinet is this lunchtime approving the principle of such a ban on evictions, they haven't got any wording in front of them. There is no law as yet drafted to give effect to all of this, so the law has to go away and be drafted first, and it's likely to mean a fairly frantic schedule in the Dáil and Shannon next week before they rise for the Halloween recess to try and get that onto the books. But Micheál Martin, on his way into this morning's Cabinet meeting, did indicate that now was the time to make this sort of move and to introduce a level of unprecedented protection for renters, the likes of which we've only ever seen before during the COVID pandemic.
There is a need to do everything we possibly can to avoid homelessness over the winter period, and that's what we're focusing on. But there's a wider set of measures as well in terms of, generally in terms of getting more houses into the market, building more houses, social affordable cost rental, to get the supply up, and that's ultimately the key to improving the housing situation. It will be time bound. There's a legal context to this, but also in terms of the balance and getting the balance of the decision right.
Now, as you say, Colette, this has been broadly welcomed by opposition parties, many of whom have been asking for measures like this for quite some time. In fact, People Before Profit are claiming some degree of credit for this because they had already said that if there wasn't some sort of legislation on the table in a couple of weeks' time, that they were going to table their own motion or their own legislation in the Dáil within the coming days anyway to trigger a vote on it one way or another. But opposition parties say that a pause on evictions will only go some of the way there and that the government needs to take this time to introduce other protections for tenants as well.
It's not just about the legislation, it's about the accompanying actions of the Minister. What is he going to do differently to increase the supply of social and affordable housing? And again, we're happy to work with him on any of those issues if he takes our advice, as he has done, albeit very belatedly, on the ban on evictions.
If landlords want to exit, fine, let the state buy up the homes so that those tenancies remain and that the families threatened with eviction and homelessness have a secure and affordable place to live in the future. And then it isn't a problem.
Now, the fact that this is time limited for 5 months does mean the government will be under pressure to bring forward some other sort of measures, whether it is increased protections for tenants or whether it is increased investment in the construction of social and affordable housing, because otherwise there will, by the government's own admission, be a big backlog of evictions built up for March when this legislation is due to lapse. And the government is insistent this lunchtime this can only be a one-off measure, and they do intend for this to ultimately lapse at the end of the first quarter of next year.
All right, Gavin, thank you for all of that. Right, let's go now to our news correspondent, Richard Chambers. Richard, you've been speaking to the group that represents landlords. What did they say to you about this?
Well, unsurprisingly, Colette, they are very much against this. They had been warned about what was coming yesterday in a meeting with the Housing Minister. They had engagement with Darragh O'Brien. They said that they'd need more incentives, but that they said as well that they didn't believe that this temporary pause on evictions would have any real impact. That despite the fact that homeless groups and advocates for housing charities as well also said that this was essential to prevent people becoming homeless and effectively going straight into rough sleeping due to the situation in emergency accommodation. But landlords and property owners associations which met with the Housing Minister yesterday say they are very much against this. In fact, the IPOA, the Property Owners Association, said that it was considering a constitutional challenge to the temporary eviction ban. They have walked that back somewhat, saying they're going to wait and see what comes out of Cabinet, but they're very much against it.
We're not surprised because all the parties have been calling for it, particularly Sinn Féin. And really, this is landlords being hijacked again, being blamed for the housing crisis. It's all got to do with the failure of successive governments to provide housing over the last few years and over reliance on the private rental system to provide homes for people. So I suppose we're not surprised. We don't support it. We don't think it's going to achieve anything.
The IPOA also saying that it's a populist and a knee-jerk move by the government to introduce this eviction ban currently being considered by the Cabinet. Now, as I said, homeless groups saying that this is very much a very essential piece of legislation to prevent the worst impacts of homelessness over the course of the winter. Threshold, for example, saying that we have seen an increase in the amount of notices to quit being served on tenants over the course of this year, and that's why it is very, very important that this legislation is enacted. They are also worried, though, about what happens once it's over, once March rolls around. What exactly is going to change in the overall situation in terms of housing and addressing homelessness?